Hi. I'm Ovinesh here from 23 Ovitech. Today I would like to talk about a retro tech which is the Game Boy Advance SP and how it holds up in 2020. So let's check it out. The Game Boy Advance SP was released back in February 2003. The Game Boy Advance SP is an upgraded version of the original Game Boy Advance. It housed a great library of video games and was backward compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. The Game Boy Advance series sold 81.5 million units worldwide, and 43.5 million of these units were Game Boy Advance SP units. But should you buy one today? What do I like about the Game Boy Advance SP? The Game Boy Advance SP is a slim device. It has 10 to 18 hours of battery life depending on the brightness of the screen, and also has a rechargeable lithium-ion battery. This was a huge leap because the regular Game Boy Advance required two AA batteries. While the Game Boy Advance did get a decent charge by constantly having to use AA batteries and spending an extra cash for its sucks. Around September 2005, Nintendo released an upgraded Game Boy Advance SP. This upgraded version featured a brighter screen and it's widely known as AGS 101 model. Like the original Game Boy Advance, the SP is also backward compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. However, they stick out of the game. The Game Boy Advance SP looks like a slim mini square when folded. When I flip the screen up, it reminds me of those old school flip phones. The volume rocker is on the left side of the SP while the power button is on the right side of the SP. This button placement feels very normal and not outdated. The L and R button are at the top of the SP. However, the L and R button are little small in comparison to a PSP, DS and 3DS. I personally do not have a problem with the button size, however I could understand why one may. With modern consoles like PS Vita and Nintendo 3DS, these small buttons do feel a little dated. The D-pad can be found on the left side of the system. Right next to the D-pad is the A and B button. These buttons are not bad also. The speaker is right below. The SP has only one speaker which can be found at the center of the SP. Considering how small is the SP, I could understand how one can accidentally block the speaker with their hands. Right underneath the speaker is the start and select button. They function as they should. The final button is the screen brightness button at the top. This was a cool feature at the time, however having a decent screen on handheld today is a must. The screen brightness button made it easier to play Game Boy Advance game in the dark. As previously mentioned, the SP is extremely small and shaped like a square. However, the small size is one of my complaints. When gripping the system, I find my fingers have very little space to breathe. In comparison to the 3DS and the Switch, the system does feel a little uncomfortable. Besides that, the SP does not have a headphone jack. You can buy headphones designed specifically for the SP, or you can use an adapter that can be used with standard headphones. If you decide to use an adapter, be aware that the adapter needs to plug into the same port as the AC adapter. Thus, you cannot use headphones and charge your device at the same time. You can buy a third-party adapter to fix this. However, is it okay to be spending extra money on something that should have been included? I guess Nintendo beats Apple to the dongle life. The Game Boy Advance, Color and the original Game Boy all included a headphone jack. This makes even more confusing on why Nintendo would skip out on including the headphone jack. Most modern and older handhelds includes the headphone jack. It honestly does not make sense to me why Nintendo did not include one. I would have to imagine it would have to do with the space. A headphone jack still would have been appreciated. The game still holds up and the SP has a great library of games. Plus, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color have a solid library of games. I personally have not played a ton of Game Boy Advance games. but the few games that I've played have been enjoyable and extremely fun. Here are some of my favorite games that I enjoy: Donkey Kong Country, Metroid Fusion, Fire Emblem Sacred Stone, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Raid Team, Pokemon Emerald, Ruby and Sapphire, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, Mega Man Zero, and last but not least, The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords. SPs generally start at about RM 150, and this is generally for the version with the weaker screen. The AGS 101 model is about 200 ringgit to 250 ringgit. The Game Boy and the Game Boy Color games are also easily accessible on the Nintendo eShop. You can access these games easily on your 3DS, a modern system. Plus, the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy system don't have the rechargeable batteries, thus you can possibly lose all your saved progress. The DS seems like a better choice because the DS can play Game Boy Advance games and include a headphone jack. I do think that DS is a great system, especially if you want to utilize the Game Boy Advance slot. The DS is also about the same price as the Game Boy Advance SP, if not cheaper. But if you like the size of the GBA AGS 101 and you are okay with the dongle life means, it's also a great choice. But if you do own a GBA AGS 001, then all you got to do is mod the display to an IPS display. So, do you think the Game Boy Advance SP worth picking up in 2020? What do you like about the Game Boy Advance SP? Let us know in the comments down below. Peace!